Infinity Pool is directed by Brandon Cronenberg and stars Alexander Skarsgård, Mia Goth, and among others. And in this story, it deals with a writer named James, played by Alexander Skarsgård, where him and his wife are on a honeymoon, and they end up being in this area, on this island where he encounters Mia Goth's character, who her and her husband essentially take him on a vacation around some parts of the island, and it becomes kind of, well, from you've seen from the trailers, Alexander Skarsgård's character starts to fall in with Mia Goth's group and everything, and it becomes a twisted tale of some weird things that happen. And there's also some twists and turns that happen that show that a lot of the obsession that happens with Alexander Skarsgård's character when he falls in with Mia Goth's. And it gets pretty insane. I'll leave it at there because there's some stuff I can't go into spoilers with. But to give into a little backstory, this movie was directed by Brandon Cronenberg, who is the son of legendary director David Cronenberg, who made classics like the remake of The Fly, History of Violence, and things like that. And he was also directed a film a couple years ago. Brandon Cronenberg directed a movie a couple years ago called Possessor that I found myself really enjoying. And since I'm not really familiar with too much of his work before that, I really got into Possessor and how he was able to, use some of his dad's elements of using body horror along with doing some other things to really keep it on the edge with a lot of really disturbing stuff. And so I can really see the future that Brandon Cronenberg has, because when I saw the trailer for this, I was really interested in what they were going to do with this kind of story with, essentially Alexander Skarsgård having to go in with these crazy people that you don't know if they're really doing things that are, it's really unpredictable the way it plays out, so to speak. And after upon seeing the film, I can honestly say that, well, so far, this is one of my favorite movies of the year. It has just a couple of minor things that hold it back, but this was quite an experience for me. Like, this movie doesn't hold back on what you would expect from this director. To get my pros out of the way, I thought Alexander Skarsgård was fantastic in this. I've really enjoyed him as an actor over the years, and I appreciate that he's really become very, that he's been able to branch out into like so many things, from going into movies like, one moment you see him in Godzilla versus King Kong, then you also see him in The Northman from last year, and then you see him in this one where he's a lot more scaled back and playing more of a kind of a wuss, so to speak, in certain ways, because he feels very he feels like basically a dog on a leash, so to speak, like a poor puppy. And the way that he just becomes throughout the movie is so obsessed with this group that he's in and everything, and seeing a lot of the limitations that makes him pretty much, question a lot of what's going on. I really felt his performance throughout this, he really carries it on his own. But the other big standout for me the most is definitely Mia Goth. Now, I've become a really big avid fan of Mia Goth ever since I saw her last year with movies like X and Pearl. And I even remember really enjoying her in the very kind of underrated movie I liked called Cure for Wellness in that one. Even though she kind of had more of a smaller role in that one, I thought she was really good. And she's really become a really good horror actress in her own right. And seeing her in this is no different. Like, she really goes for it, not only the one that kind of like lures into Alexander Skarsgård, but in the, seducing him and things like that. But also just the way that she can also play insane, but in the right way, like she did in Pearl and in X as well. And so she was fantastic in this, and every scene she was on, she just steals every single moment. She can be quite a bit out there, and when it gets toward the end, and I can see some of the complaints that some people have with toward the end of it when she goes a little too over the top. But I think it really worked for her character from the way it plays out. And so I had really no complaints with it. And so I thought they were great. And then one of the other biggest things I love the most is just the way that the movie, goes along the story with whether or not the group that basically some of the stuff that the group are getting into. Without going into spoilers, it gets into some stuff that pretty much they're getting away with on this island, and it gets into some pretty serious shit where there's some laws that abide with what they can and can't do on the island and stuff. And it does have some interesting social commentary with how they do with the whole rich angle, with how rich people, are able to not get into certain crimes and stuff. And so I really like how they tackle on that aspect of it. And one of the other biggest things I got to appreciate the most is visually, this movie is very not only stunning looking with the cinematography in a lot of parts, but also just the way that there are certain scenes, especially, well, not to get into too much detail, But let's just say there's an orgy scene that happens that gets like pretty trippy ass shit that like I was already on drugs when I was watching it. So I thought that was pretty like crazy. That was pretty trippy in a good way. But Brandon Cronenberg really knows how to really set the mood on a lot of the scenes that he plays out with, and I got to really appreciate the score in this as well. It had that very kind of like dark, kind of like ominous score that builds the intensity up, and I thought it was fantastic. And then to get into some other things too, there's a twist that happens like at the beginning of the film where you find out more about what's happening with the whole thing, and it made it even more interesting as it went along, as you really start to see a lot of what a lot of the people are doing on this island. And it gets into some pretty brutal territory and things that the characters do that are unpredictable that I couldn't really wait to see how it played out. And I'll leave it there because there's more I want to go in detail, but this is definitely a movie that I highly do recommend. And the only kind of minor things I would say that kind of hold the movie back from being like really as great would be there is the stuff that's involving with Alexander Skarsgård's wife in the film. I felt like she could have had a more central part of the film because about midway or so through the film she kind of disappears and we don't see her again or hear from her until the very end of it. And I think that having her throughout the rest of the movie and her going along with seeing a lot of the stuff that's happening really could have brought it more interesting and added a whole lot more to it. And there's also some other things that they build up to in the beginning of the film that I think that they could have like added more onto on top of it. Like there's the officer that arrests Alexander Skarsgård in the beginning that I think that we could have had a bigger payoff with, because it felt like it was really big. It felt like there could have been something a lot more bigger than what we saw as the movie went along with. And so there's that. But other than that, though, I still really enjoyed this film. And I don't know if it'll make my honorable mentions at least or anything, but I still had a fantastic time. And with that, I'm going to give the movie a low phenomenal grade on the Film Freaks meter. So for those of you who have also seen Infinity Pool, let me know in the comments below what you thought about it. And thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next review. I'll see you later.